Hello and welcome to NYFA's Webinar Wednesdays, a weekly virtual series specifically designed for Nebraska communities and housing partners. My name is John Turner and I'm Manager of Community Development and Research at the Nebraska Investment Finance Authority. Also joining me today from NYFA is Susan Pullis. She's the Outreach and Community Development Administrator who is behind the scenes helping to monitor the questions and chat. Before we get started, I would like to take this time to thank our sponsor today, Klein Williams. So thank you everyone for attending today's webinar on housing resources for transition age youth. Our panelists today are Moderator Danelle Vaughan, who is the Youth Homeless Demonstration Program Homeless Management Information System Administrator and Coordinated Entry Manager at UNL's Center on Children, Families, and the Law. She holds a Master of Social Work from Missouri State University and a Bachelor of Journalism from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Danelle has previously worked as a case manager for a rapid rehousing program in West Des Moines, Iowa, and as a program director for One Door, an agency in Springfield, Missouri, that provides housing referrals and assistance to homeless and at-risk individuals and families. She currently lives in Lincoln with her husband, 2 daughters, and 2 dogs. Also, we have Christina Lloyd, program director from Cedars Bridges Transitional Living Program, Street Outreach, and Youth Opportunity Center. Christina holds a Bachelor's of Science degree in Human and Social Services Administration. She is currently employed at Cedars Youth Services in Lincoln, Nebraska, where her focus has been on the prevention and support of at-risk and homeless youth. Christina oversees the Transitional Living Program, Street Outreach, and Youth Opportunity Center for youth who are at risk of homelessness or who are already homeless. And a big thank you today to Krista Cook, who is the host home specialist at Region 5 Systems. Dani DeVries was originally scheduled and is unable to join us, so Krista graciously accepted the offer to speak in her place. You'll hear more from Krista later in the presentation. We would like to attendees to save all of their questions until the end of the presentation. You can use the question feature on the right to input your questions, and the NYFA staff will hold those until the end. If you prefer to ask your questions, simply raise your hand and we can unmute you. So with that, I will kick it over to Danelle.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to share my screen. I have just a little presentation. Okay, so YHDP is a newer project for the balance of state. Nebraska Balance of State was awarded our funding for YHDP in July 2018. So we have funding for a 2-year demonstration project. So what that means is that as a demonstration project, we just have the ability to be a little bit more flexible in how we're serving youth in our system. So if we find that something's maybe not working, or maybe we put some money into one area of a project and we're needing to move it around fairly quickly, we just have a little bit more flexibility to do that as a demonstration project. So the purpose of YHDP is to increase the housing and program inventory around the state for youth. Specifically, what we know is that in rural areas, just the housing inventory is just smaller, and youth tend to have barriers around like rental history or credit history that may make it harder for them to rent. So YHDP has provides the opportunity to help youth stabilize through like our transitional housing projects, where they can work with an agency. The agency can be the leaseholder. They can earn that kind of rental history and then sign the lease on their own at any given time during the service of the project. So our goal through YHDP was not only to house homeless youth, but also to help youth create community connections, and then to really look at how our system works with mainstream resources that are focused on youth, and then helping youth achieve not only housing goals, but also goals around things like education. They get like life skills and that kind of stuff. And so it was designed to go beyond housing, even though housing is one of the central focuses. So our project launched in October 2019, which was when I was hired on. So I wasn't here for the initial application process. I was hired on once the project was ready to launch. And then we accepted our first clients into our coordinated entry system on December 4th of 2019. So we launched shortly before COVID. We also did a significant, we changed our HMIS systems in March. So we had a lot of change in just that first few months of YHDP. But I feel like we've done pretty good. Our first year, we served 229 youth through coordinated entry. So that can be youth that were coming from Lincoln into the balance of state, or just youth that were in the balance of state. So it's not just youth in the rural areas. Some of them were coming from urban areas as well. So YHDP serves 3 categories under HUD's definitions for homelessness. The first is that we serve any youth that's literally homeless. So that could be that they're in a shelter, they're on the streets, they're in a TH program, they're in a hotel. So anything that counts as literal homeless. For youth that are exiting from an institution such as foster care or juvenile justice, we do require that they have at least 1 night of literal homelessness before we can serve them. We have a process that we use. We have guidelines for our system as far as when youth from those systems enter our projects or enter our system, that we just have some pieces that we follow as far as who we contact to ensure that's a proper referral. We make sure that there's no other housing options for them, just because we really rely on other systems to kind of do their piece before we step in and do ours. Category 2 is different for YHDP than it is for any other for the rest of the system in the balance of state in Lincoln. We have an expanded definition of homelessness under YHDP, which means that we are allowed to serve youth that are couch surfing. So that falls under category 2. So if a youth is bouncing around, doesn't have a stable housing environment, is being asked to leave a family situation within 2 weeks, or is leaving some sort of legal guardianship and has no housing after that, then we do have the opportunity to serve those youth. Other systems, there are certain projects that cannot serve couch surfing youth or adults, but we do have the ability to do that. And then our 4th category is any youth that's fleeing violence. So those are youth that are in domestic violence situations, trafficking situations, any type of abuse or illegal activity that might put them or their family, should they be a parenting youth, at risk. Our system serves youth age 24 and under. We do take into account that any youth under the age of 18 is not legally able to sign off on their own releases. So in those cases, when we do have a youth that may be 17 or 16, we do ask for some sort of release from a guardian or a parent, like that could be a parent or a foster care provider, a case manager, that says that yes, they do need housing assistance and they can have their information put into our system. So we do tend to focus more on the 18 to 24. They're a little bit a lot easier to house, I would say, just because by the age of 18, they can sign their own lease. When we have we've only had a handful of those who are 16 or 17. They're just a little bit harder to house. Landlords can't have them sign paperwork because they're legally not able to. So those are when we really work on the case management piece and try and figure out if there's another situation or solution that we can provide for those youth. So YHDP has a number of different projects under our umbrella. The first is our Joint Transitional Rapid Rehousing Project. This is the project that we have the most of. It covers the majority of our state. So what it is transitional housing and rapid rehousing kind of act together. So if a youth cannot sign their own lease, or like in the like CareCore has their own housing that they are the leaseholders for, so they can move a youth into that housing. They're the leaseholders. They can stabilize that youth, and then that youth can go on to sign their own lease. So that's the TH piece. And then rapid rehousing is the traditional rapid rehousing where the client signs the lease, and then they get a subsidy from the project. The youth are eligible for up to 24 months in both projects. So they can get 24 months of transitional housing, 24 months of rapid rehousing for a total of 4 years. And then I think we have 4 THRRH projects right now in the balance of state. So those are just, that's the one we rely on the most in the Panhandle and in North Central Nebraska. Permanent supportive housing is for those youth that have long-term disabilities. Christina will talk more on that. Basically, if we have a youth that says, yes, they have a disability, they could be eligible for this program. And then the agency will work with that youth to get the paperwork and the diagnosis that would ultimately qualify them for PSH. Rapid response is basically, it functions in 2 different ways. It can be a prevention program. So if we have any youth that are at risk of losing their housing within 14 days, they hold their lease, they're going to lose their housing, they need rental assistance, they can access rapid response. It also acts as rapid rehousing. So if a youth can use just the short-term assistance up to 3 months, they just need a security deposit, first month's rent, and then a little bit of assistance to just kind of self-stabilize, then that's when rapid response can step in. Those are rapid responses really for youth that are low barrier and just need very short, immediate assistance to stay housing and keep them off of our house, like we keep them off of our housing list then because they can easily stabilize. So coaching is the one thing that's really different with YHDP. Under our project, we have created a partnership with Central Plains Center for Services, and any youth that is identified in our system who needs any type of housing assistance, even if that's just prevention, gets a referral to coaching. And that coaching referral happens at the same time that they're sent to coordinated entry, or if it's for rapid response, it happens at the time that they're enrolled in that project. So the coaches are very, very skilled at what they do. Around any aspects of the youth's life, including education, family, any type of community engagement. They can help with job hunting, just about anything that a youth might need to just kind of get their life stabilized, kind of meet some goals. The coach is there to support. So the way that we have it set up in our system is that the coaches and our housing case managers for YHDP work so closely together to really identify what's happening with the youth, what their needs are. And then the coaches do help with some pieces of housing, but they really just, that communication with those YHDP case managers around helping those youth, that's the key piece. And so we have coaches on our coordinated entry calls every week that can provide just a little bit more information about kind of where the youth is at this point in their life. The coaches can work with youth for a full year. So even if a youth is housed through a housing program, or they self-resolve, or sometimes they kind of fall off of our housing case manager's radar and are bouncing around again, there's a lot of times that our coaches are still in touch with them and working with them. So we really rely on them to kind of give us an idea of what's happening in the youth's life. And they've just been an amazing partner. And then our final project that we have under our umbrella is Host Homes. That is Chris's project. I'm going to let her talk a little bit more about that. Basically, the host provides a stable home for the youth for a specific amount of time. They help the youth stabilize their housing, and then the youth can continue to look for housing on their own, so that when they exit the host homes program, they'll automatically, have that stable housing environment. So here are our projects. We have projects in all regions of our state currently. Central Plains covers the entire state, including Lincoln. They have a project in Lincoln, but it's not through YHDP, their PALS program. And then our system does not cover Omaha, so we don't cover, I think, Douglas and Sarpy County. So every area of the state is covered except for those two counties. And then just a little bit about coordinated entry. So any youth that needs housing does need to come through our coordinated entry system. I can probably post it in chat. We have a brochure that we use that has a list of phone numbers and access points. So if a youth is experiencing homeless or at risk of homelessness, they can go to any of those points of contact to have their intake done and their assessment completed to be put on coordinated entry. At that point, they'll also get the referral to coaching. And then we kind of take over and determine if they want to stay where they're at or if they're wanting to move around the state. And then we'll connect them to the correct housing opportunity. The only projects that don't necessarily have to go through coordinated entry would be rapid response for prevention. And those youth a lot of times just will connect directly with either CareCorps or Central Plains. Those are the two holders of the rapid response funding. And then I have my contact information on here. Denise Packard is the coordinated entry manager for the balance of state. So she and I work really, really close on watching those lists, ensuring that we have updates on youth. And any youth, she also does Lincoln. So any youth that are in Lincoln that want to come to the balance of state, we communicate on those. So that is the basics for me. I am going to turn it over to Christina Lloyd. She can talk more about the PSH through Cedars.
Thank you, Danelle. Hello, I am Christina Lloyd. I'm with Cedars Youth Services here in Lincoln. I am going to attempt to share my screen as well. So give me just a moment here. Okay, so Cedars operates a permanent supportive housing program utilizing the YHDP funds. So Cedars has historically done transitional housing in Lincoln and only Lincoln. We've operated transitional housing in the city of Lincoln for about 20 years. We have a variety of funding sources within Lincoln. So we have a continuum of care funded HUD grant, so Housing and Urban Development Grant, that allows us to work with youth that are 18 to 24 years of age that are currently pregnant or parenting. We also have 2 grants with Family and Youth Services Bureau that is for 17 to 22-year-olds. We can serve singles in one of those grants, and then we also have pregnant parenting with that same grant. And then we also contract with the Department of Health and Human Services and Juvenile Probation to provide services and housing to youth where independent living has been deemed appropriate. So they can be in the program at the age of 17 up until the age of 19, which is the age of majority, or until their case closes, whichever one comes first. So when YHDP started, we really had to decide whether we wanted to venture out a little bit. So we did decide, after looking at all the different options available with YHDP, to try permanent supportive housing. So permanent supportive housing, like Danelle said, are for individuals that have permanent disabilities, and it's long-term assistance. So we provide financial assistance in the means of rental, security deposit, and then just support and advocacy for the youth. So our model, of course, is using YHDP grants. We focus on youth 18 to 24. Like Danelle said, it's harder to do younger than 18, and that's because they can't legally sign into any lease of their own. And since they are the leaseholder, unfortunately, we can't really do anybody under the age of 18. It is long-term assistance though, so there's really no timeline on how long they can remain in our program. And the nice part about the PSH model is that they get to choose what community they want to reside in. Whereas our model here in Lincoln is, you obviously have to remain in the city of Lincoln. So we definitely faced some challenges when we started PSH. The first was just moving from Lincoln to rural Nebraska. We honestly felt like we were kind of the new kid on the block. Like we didn't know all the resources available. We didn't know the other agencies, where we felt like a lot of the agencies already knew each other. So it was difficult for us initially to really get going. And then just finding landlords in a new community. The staff for the Permanent Supportive Housing Program is officed here in Lincoln. So at times it was difficult reaching out, trying to find new landlords and doing that all via phone. Just from our experience here in Lincoln, sometimes it was walking into an office of an apartment complex and introducing ourselves to get the apartment. So it was kind of a new challenge for us. The other things were just navigating a new community. I mean, trying to figure out where food pantries are, where youth can get furniture, obviously no public transportation, making sure that they're finding an apartment that's near grocery stores, employment opportunities, things that if they need to, they can ride a bike or walk to. The other challenges was just verifying a disability. That's not something we previously had experience with doing. So if we did not already have the documentation from the youth, it was our responsibility to help set up new assessments for them to get the verification of disability. So luckily we found a provider here in Lincoln that we worked with previously. She worked at another agency here in town. And we were able to kind of work on an agreement with her where if we had a youth that needed an assessment, we would go pick them up in whatever community they were located in and bring them back to Lincoln so she could complete an assessment with them. We also had the staff trained in SOARCE. So if they need to fill out any disability applications like SSI, we had a staff that was able to do that with them. Of course, just not being the leaseholder was a new challenge for us. Here in Lincoln, we are the leaseholder of all the transitional living units. So all the communication with landlords was directly with us. If there was a safety concern, we were able to check the apartment, things like that. So going from being a leaseholder to the youth being the leaseholder was a little bit different for us. And then just the locating the youth on the balance of state list. When it initially started, that was definitely a challenge for us because the majority of the youth were not located within the area we were looking to serve. When we wrote the grant, we initially said we'd serve the Southeast service area. We quickly had to change that. We actually went as far out as Kearney to house one of the youth because that's where they were and that's where they wanted to remain. And so we just had to make adjustments to our grant to fit the needs of the youth. So prior to housing, the staff is working closely with them to provide case management through the entire process. That process includes apartment searching, just being a landlord liaison, oftentimes having to explain in great detail what we're going to do to support the youth. Of course, obtaining that disability documentation, and then just remaining as an advocate and support for the youth and through the entire process, making sure they fully understand what that lease says, because really that's going to be their expectations while they're in the program is following the expectations of that lease. So making sure they understand what happens if they don't pay their rent on time or if they get, a 1430 notice, just making sure they fully understand that lease. And then of course, just assisting with the whole application process, helping fill out the application. You forget to put something on the application, it might get screened out, and then we have to start finding a new landlord and paying the security deposit for them once they've found that location that they want to reside in. Once we've secured housing, so we do, it's our expectation or our requirement is that we meet weekly with them. We feel like in order to support them that we have to see them on a weekly basis, so that those meetings are always done wherever they're at. So there for a while, we're driving back and forth to Kearney every week. And sometimes that meeting consisted of talking about what a discharge plan might look like if they're nearing time for discharge or if they're wanting to discharge. Sometimes helping them get to food pantries, filling out applications for employment, things like that. Making sure that they have the opportunity to focus on education if that's something that they want to continue doing. Initial meetings oftentimes consisted of making sure they received economic benefits, so completing SNAP applications, those SSI benefits. When we initially started YHDP, it was for only single youth. However, we have expanded that to parenting. So that benefit application will look slightly different. So we could be doing, Title 20 assistance. So making sure they have childcare, things like that. Just continuing to be a mediator for the landlord if necessary. Helping them navigate all the resources, which I feel like is something that we continue to learn in every community we're in. The ongoing rental and utility assistance. And then the staff is trained in RentWise. For those of you that may not know what RentWise is, it is a curriculum that teaches how to be a good tenant and what your law, like the relationships and laws of the landlord versus the tenant. So we like to provide that to all the youth. Some of the youth might also be applying for like a Section 8 housing voucher. So RentWise does allow them a priority on the wait list. And then just crisis intervention and support. When we started this program, we intended for the staff to kind of be that on-call support. We never intended for anyone to have to necessarily go out. We'd help, navigate over the phone, maybe tell them where they need to go or what they need to do. But recently, the staff did respond to an emergency at like 8:30 at night. She drove to Ashland to help one of her clients. So it's gone a little bit above and beyond what we had initially anticipated. And I have a much shorter presentation than Danelle. So we'll answer questions at the end if there are any, but I'm going to pass it on to Krista.
All right, I'm going to share my screen. There we go. All right. Well, I'm Krista. I am here at Region 5 Systems, and I am covering for Danelle. And I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of an idea of who I am. I previously was working with CASA for Lancaster County. And so my background is almost all juvenile justice and child welfare. And so one of the huge needs, if anybody ever works in that field, is what happens to kiddos who age out of foster care. I think that's one of my, where kind of my heart is, I guess, is to reach out to those kiddos who are aging out of a system with nothing but what they've learned. And so the Host Homes Project was created after a program that is nationwide. We're the only ones in Nebraska that are doing a Host Homes program with the hope to expand it statewide. But if anybody's familiar with Point Source Youth, I talk with the agency that is in Georgia monthly, and we talk about how to model, how to put in best practices when working with this age group and things like that. And so I did grab some statistics just out of our state. So looking at the U.S. Department Housing and Urban Development numbers from 2018, Nebraska had 2,421 people experiencing homelessness. And of that total, 236 were families and 157 were that unaccompanied young adult. And that's our transition age youth that we're talking about. That's the 18 to 24-year-olds who are just on their own, unaccompanied, couch surfing, street homeless, whatever state whatever level of homelessness they're experiencing. The U.S. Department of Education looked at the 2016-2017 school year for Nebraska public schools. We had 3,422 students experiencing homelessness, and that is all the way down to elementary school age kiddos. 210 were unsheltered street homeless. 858 were in shelters, and then 331 were in hotels. And so when we think about young people and where they came from, if that's their backstory, those are their life experiences, they hit 19, there's no one around to provide any kind of guidance. What do they do? Where do they go? How do they get questions answered? Like, how do I file taxes? How do I apply for school? Where do I find resources for housing? And especially these kiddos that grew up in foster care who have never made a decision or been in a place where they could think long-term. If they're constantly meeting those basic needs, those Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if they're just meeting basic needs, how are they thinking about, well, next year I'm going to need an apartment, or in 6 months, I should probably start looking at school applications and things like that. It's just not on their radar. And so we wanted to design host homes to almost mimics foster care. But the goal of host homes is to shift the idea of meeting a child's needs and shift it more towards, I'm opening my home up for this young adult to stabilize and grow into their own adulthood. So the idea of host homes is, like I said, it kind of mimics foster care. The idea is that we give a young adult 1 year to live with somebody in their home and stabilize it. They don't have to worry about food. They just have a safe home to get their feet underneath of them, ask questions, look for job, look for school options, look for, voc rehab options, whatever their life is going to look like. This is the safe space to ask those questions, have some resources. And then the goal at the end of the year is that they transition out to living on their own with all of their services set up for them. We can do an extension, so we don't, we talk about youth who have that failure to launch. We don't boot you out at the end of the year. We can extend that. Most of the time, these youth are up and moving before the end of the year. The other kind of upside to doing a host homes is that it is not another institution. It's a home. It's somebody's home where they live and they function, and they, are providing a support for this young adult. It's not a group home setting, or it's not there's no locked doors or anything like that. It is a home setting. So as far as finding our young adults, we get our young adults from the balance of state, from our YHDP calls. If somebody, one of those central access points, if they're working with a young adult that says, hey, I have an uncle that I used to live with that's willing to take me in, then I can get in touch with them, and I wrap services around the host and the young adult. It's really kind of it's definitely a multidisciplinary and kind of teamwork that we do here. And we do serve, we don't just serve youth that are coming out of the juvenile justice or child welfare system. We have youth who are just needing to get out of whatever housing situation they're in. Maybe their parents are no longer stable, or there's tension in the home that they're living in. It's not a good fit. They need somewhere else to go. We're that transition piece to get them on their own. Once they come in through that coordinated entry that Danelle was talking about, an assessment is done to give them priority levels. And so anybody that falls into that 18 to 24-year-old is a high priority, and I can take them right away. There's not a huge waiting list. We try to get them in. We understand that they're a vulnerable population. The other thing that host homes provides is we do, and I'll talk about this when we get a little bit further down here, but we do some trainings and we do offer supports for the host so that they're not just walking into something blind and on their own. We're not just going to be like, hey, we're going to put this young adult in your home. See ya, have fun. We do have programs. We do have goals. We have things that they need to meet. I do serve 21 counties, so I cover more of the Southeast region. For Lincoln and Omaha is always a touchy. I know that there's some questions about why Lincoln and Omaha are so different. We did get an extension that I can have hosts in Lincoln or Omaha, but my young adult needs to be coming from the balance of state from outside those two locations. They're just kind of their own entity. There's different resources there. So what the host is responsible for, right away when I get an application for a host or a host is identified, I want to make sure that they are able to provide a room with a door. And I know that sounds kind of like, okay, but a couch is better than homelessness, right? Yes, but the idea is that we want these young adults to be able to be treated like young adults so that they can function as young adults when they're no longer in the house setting. So they do need to have a room that has privacy, that has a door. We want a host home to understand that they are going to need to provide some emotional support. I mean, how many of us, whatever our backgrounds are, we're ready to just make life decisions and be successful at 19, 20, 21. We all had questions along the way, and we want that to be a safe space for these young adults to ask those questions that seem like common sense. The other piece is that we do want, we don't ask our hosts to be short order cooks. We don't want you to get into that trap of, we don't want it to be a point of tension, but we do want the young adult to be able to have those basic needs met so that they can start looking into the future and making plans because they know that those needs are met. We want to know that there's going to be groceries in the house. We want to know that if a youth, for whatever reason, is not able to make it to an appointment, whether it's for mental health services, job interviews, scoping out schools, we want to know that the host is at least willing and able to provide transportation for those kinds of things. Most of the time, our young adults, that's one of their goals, is that before I can move out, I need to have my transportation figured out. But in the meantime, we want the host to be able to take that responsibility on. And then the other portion is kind of that's it kind of goes back to that safe space. We want to allow for a calm, safe space for the young adult to practice living with other people as an adult. And what does that look like while you're in someone's home, but transitioning into adulthood? So our guests, our young adults, will get one of those coaches from Central Plains as soon as they are enrolled, as soon as they get their priority number and are on our balance of state. That coaching referral goes right out right away, and the coach works, just like Danelle said, they work really hand in hand with me, and so we are constantly in communication, making sure that if this young adult needs help finding scholarships or job applications, they've got myself or this coach that can be hands-on and make sure that we're giving them all the support that they can get. Case management is provided by myself. Like I said, I do assessments. They write their goals and I monitor, and every month we talk about how much closer are we to each of these goals. They're typically things, like I said, it's transportation, housing, education, those kinds of things. And then also a lot of times when I'm working with youth who have come out of foster care, our first goal, our first couple of months together is just getting identification figured out. It's, social security cards, driver's license, IDs, birth certificates, all those things that just oftentimes seem to kind of fall through the cracks. And so we want to make sure that we have all of those things in place so that they can be successful. And then the safe and stable housing. that's the host home with the goal of transitioning into a safe and stable home after the host. Becoming a host. So this is the majority of my work right now is most of my young adults that I have right now have identified family members, family friends, people that they've known that have said, I'll take them in. And I have had foster parents who just kind of kept their kiddo after they aged out of the system. And so we've got, that's kind of what we're working with right now, with my goal of going out to each of my 21 counties and making sure that all the services, the schools, resources in that community know about host homes, that is an option. I'd like to have a pool of hosts. And so when I get a young adult off of the balance of state, I can say, hey, let's go meet this host and see if that's a good fit for you, if you feel comfortable there. We do have an application on our website. We do background checks. I will say that we try to be as realistic as possible. There are some things that just cannot, there's some things on a background check that we just cannot allow. We have to keep it safe for both the host and the guest. We also use background checks in our matching process. So if we say we have a host who is in recovery, who has been in recovery from substance use, and I have a guest who is actively using or wants to have, they're adults, they're over 21 and want to drink. And maybe that turns into a trigger for the host. And so that's not a good fit. And so we do use background checks as like a conversation piece as we're talking about matching. I check out the home first. Also, I make sure that there is that room, the bedroom with the door, and make sure that there's space and a good condition living space for everybody. And then that matching process, like I said, we're gonna make sure that it's a good fit for both the host and the guest. The idea is to keep it safe and stable and supportive. And so we want to make sure that matches up and give both parties the opportunity to say, I'm not comfortable here. We do also, like I said, we don't just, take in a host and say, okay, here's that young adult, see you later. We give them a handbook that's got emergency resources. What do I do if this youth is escalated and I can't calm them down and it's 2 o'clock in the morning? Who do I call? There's a handbook with all of those resources in there. We sit down and do mediations if needed between the host and the guest, if that's something that's needed to get through just kind of living, it's difficult to live with other people. And so how can we navigate that conversation? Obviously, we do basic first aid just so that we know everybody's safe in the home if something comes up. And then that key component to our training is that we want our hosts to go through a trauma-informed care kind of training. So if they're working with an at-risk youth or a child who is aged out of foster care, the juvenile justice system, we want them to be trauma-informed because it's so easy to write some of this population off as like naughty teenagers, or some of their behaviors can just look really difficult, and they're really difficult to handle. But we want people to have the education to understand that sometimes naughty behavior is stemming from trauma and abuse and all kinds of other things. And we want them to have an understanding of what that looks like and what happens to the brain when you go through trauma for an extended period of time. And then other trainings, I do try to specialize my trainings. I have a family with the bio dad of my young adult is a trans woman. And so we put in some trainings with the family to talk about, okay, how do we transition with dad? How do we do this as a family unit and some things like that. So we try to keep it specialized and relevant to our families. We also provide the host with a monthly allowance. It is not very much. It's just $350 for the month of service. And that's really just to cover the cost of having another human being in your house. It's not much. We don't want it to go towards rent. We want it to go towards those like added costs. So, more utilities being used, groceries in the house, things like that. And so, like I said, it's not a whole lot, but it is something to kind of help keep things moving for that year. And then here is our information. My phone number is down at the bottom there. You're welcome to go on our website and look around, or you can email me directly if you have any questions. And that is about all I have. So thank you.
Thank you all. Appreciate the great information. One thing I was reflecting on is when Nebraska Balance of State continued to carry out these fundings, I remember being a part of some community meetings planning for the event. And one of the things I thought was really cool was how youth were part of the planning process, like a youth advisory board, but just hearing kind of that, what is the term? Nothing without us, nothing about us without us. So I thought that was cool. And it reflects in your presentations that their voices were heard. It looks like we have questions in chat and in our question and answer. So the first thing I was going to ask, I saw it's okay if we give out your contact information if people have questions afterwards. And I also, we have everyone's PowerPoint, so we will share those on our website. And I was going to mention later, but this will be on YouTube, just like all of our other webinars. But it looks like someone did ask, Danelle, I think when you were talking about why would Douglas and Sarpy not be included, do you want to talk about how the different continuums and...
Yeah, so Douglas and Sarpy County are part of a different continuum of care. So they don't fall under the umbrella of CCFL. They, their continuum is called MACH, I think, MACCH. So they have a separate system than us. So we do in our HMIS system, there is movement between our systems. So we can see when somebody's in shelter in Omaha, or they can refer over to our system, but we're just separate entities. So we communicate as a whole, but we're just under different umbrellas. That's all.
Okay, and I do know that this was a very competitive grant, and it was a lot of congratulatory information when this came out in 2018 that the Balance of State got it. But I think Lincoln has applied and Omaha have applied, but haven't made it through yet. And it sounds like Lincoln and Omaha are going to keep plugging along and try to get
I believe there's another application coming, around 4 application coming. We're just waiting for word from HUD, and I expect that both Lincoln and Omaha will apply.
Excellent. Okay, moving down here. Someone had said, I did not see any Southwest counties on the served list except for coaching and something else. Does that mean that these are the only services available to youth in the central area?
So we are broken into regions. And so we do have services in the Panhandle. Capwin provides joint THRH. And then in our South Central region, which is our Region 3 area. So MID is one of the main agencies that we work with. They did not apply for YHDP, but we do have a couple of agencies, like Christina said, her PSH project will come over into that region. SynCap also drops down into that region as necessary. But MID is on our calls. So when we have youth that are in that region, they can apply for other services, housing services through MID. It's just not under the YHDP umbrella. So they still have to follow they can't do the expanded definition for category 2. But we do work closely with them when we have youth that are identified in that region.
Okay. And when you say MID, it's Community Action of Mid-Nebraska.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
CENCAP is Central Nebraska.
Central Nebraska Community Action Partnership.
Got it. Okay. Let's see here. Someone asked for your contact information and if the presentations will be available. Yes. Krista, how well are the wraparound services received by the family that takes in the transitioning youth? If there's pushback, what are other paths to take to ensure the youth's success?
Yeah, the cool thing about my program is that nothing's mandatory. So they get to kind of customize what services they want. We do have some, like I said, we have some of those kind of basic requirement trainings of the host to cover trauma-informed care, homelessness, education, and like some first aid stuff, things like that. But otherwise, I sit down and say, hey, like what services do you want? And so I put those in place, and I have had the spectrum. I've had very, very hands-on kind of hosts who are like, give me everything you got. And I'm like every day looking for a resource for them and just offering it. And then I have some that say, I really want, I mean, we've been, living together. I've been living with this young adult for about a year now. You guys are jumping in, helping them get on their feet. I don't really need much. And so it's very customized. I have never come across somebody that has been enrolled in the program say, absolutely not, I will not comply. Like I've never had that happen. My program is very, I'm coming to you because I want this kind of approach. So usually when I get pushback, it's from the guests. And it's, again, they steer the ship. They write the program, they tell me what they want and I go get it and they utilize it how they want. So I don't have a whole lot of pushback from people.
Okay, thank you. And then we did get a question here. What are each of the organizations doing to assist children who speak a different language? Are there any classes to help children who have a different cultures navigate the system? So I guess
I'm actually able to serve undocumented young adults, which I love. I love housing people. I love getting people into safe, stable situations. And I love that I don't have that red tape of like, well, you need to prove that you're an American citizen or I can't help you. I don't have that. I have utilized all kinds of resources for this, translation services. I've utilized Legal Aid of Nebraska, and I've utilized the Law College, who have worked on immigration law. And gotten resources that way. I've worked with the Asian American Center and found resources for people. Yeah, as far as classes, I mean, I think that there's classes all over depending on what you're looking for. When I think of culture, I also think about like our LGBTQ youth. And I'm hoping to I'm in the process of starting a partnership with PFLAG to create what I call ally homes. And basically it's a safe, stable home that's welcoming to an LGBTQ culture and needs. So yeah, we're kind of, it's on our radar.
Thanks.
I would just say that we too can serve youth that are not documented. We have a relationship with someone here in Lincoln that has helped navigate some of our youth through becoming citizens, because that is actually a lot more difficult than you would anticipate. So luckily we know someone that used to work for immigration. So they've been very helpful with guiding us through that process and helping the youth. And then also just connecting them to different resources. If there's like a language barrier, if Cedars has another staff that is able to speak other languages, we have a resource here, like within the Cedars agency, that indicates what other languages people are able to speak, so we can utilize that. Or, different services in the community that allow us to communicate with them. And then we do lots of like culture and sensitivity trainings here. So that's something that we always make sure people are fully aware of and respect.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, I'm not seeing another question yet. One of the things that Christina and I talked about a little bit yesterday during our practice was something I experienced when I housed youth in my former job, was how I sometimes felt like I was setting people up to fail by putting a young adult in an apartment by themselves. And so one of the things that really came out today in your presentation was how thoughtful everyone is and how thoughtful your programs are about just making sure that those resources are there. They don't feel alone. I don't know, could you talk a little bit about that, your experience with that, Christina, and how you help, you know, integrate a youth into independent living?
So, I mean, a lot of times the youth that we're working with, you know, they might come from a lot of history of trauma. So just being very trauma informed, you know, meeting the youth where they're at, non-judgmental, but there are times where you are putting youth that probably don't have the appropriate living skills, because it's just something that they were never taught, something that you and I probably take for granted because our parents taught us how to cook or do laundry, little things like that, that a lot of times these youth don't even know how to do. So that's where the staff and like the coaches are really important. Those life skills are essential, and they're oftentimes things that we have to actually teach them to do. Teach them how to grocery shop, teach them how to do their laundry at the laundromat. You know, those are things that they just don't do. And if you see a youth, we oftentimes, especially here in Lincoln with our transitional living, you know, a youth is placed with us, and within a few weeks, it's pretty obvious that this may not have been the right placement, but we're not just going to give up on them. So we're going to see what additional supports and resources we can bring in to continue supporting them. So oftentimes that might be a parenting resource, bringing in another agency that can help, or another resource we have here at Cedars. But just wrapping as many supports around as we can, and a lot of times relying on those other agencies that you need to build a relationship with, to help support that youth. So communication, support, building relationships, all essential in supporting these young adults to make sure they're successful.
Great, thank you. So, you know, it's one of the questions we often like to ask, especially for people on the call today that maybe don't have a lot of experience with this, is what can we as community members do to help serve transition age youth?
Become a host home.
Great plug. Yeah, I mean, wouldn't you say a lot of it's just, I mean, the fact that people are on today listening, but being aware and recognizing. And, you know, NYFA does work a lot with developers, and you know, there might be opportunities in the future where some developers might want to build something specifically for this population. And I know that's come up before. And I know there are some programs that are like that. So I guess, what would be your advice if I was a developer and I said, you know what, I want to build an apartment complex for, so youth have a place to live? What would be some advice you'd give them?
Well, I was going to say, prior to that question, John,
Yeah.
that I think it's important for people, especially landlords, to be willing to maybe take a chance on youth. I mean, the majority of the time, they don't have rental history or employment. Their credit is not good, or they just don't have any. So, you know, taking a chance and allowing us to be able to support them and work with the landlord and help them gain those self-sufficiency skills. But as far as developers, especially in these communities that don't have the transportation, I mean, making sure it's accessible for the individual to get their needs met. I mean, somebody can't walk 3 miles to the grocery store and then bring back 4 bags, you know, making it accessible. It's one thing that I think about whenever we're talking about no public transportation.
And I was thinking the same thing. Is I think if somebody was going to be developing another program or like an apartment complex, which would be awesome, I think doing it with the mindset of collaboration. I think Nebraska, I was a Navy kid. I lived all over the place. And I think Nebraska has I mean, there's just so many programs and resources and little communities and things like that. So I think if you're going to do a planning project or start a nonprofit or anything in that realm, I think you have to bring other stakeholders to the table. I think there's a lot of kind of like practical details that fall through the cracks that make services, again, like inaccessible in some way. And so if you can collaborate with the organizations who are working face to face with the population that you're trying to serve. I think that's huge. Get as much input and as much, yeah, just collaborate the heck out of anything, make it multidisciplinary. And
Yeah, and I would think community is so essential. That was something I picked up on in some of the breakout groups when we were working on the planning of this, was how powerful loneliness is. And if you just having a community, having friends, being connected to community. So I guess when you say accessible, that kind of is part of that too, you know, not being close to groceries, but library, you know, public space, community rooms. Do you have any experience that you'd like to share about the Youth Action Board? I just think that's, you know, I know that Nebraska Children and Families has Project Everlast, and I hear about that, but anyone want to share about their experience with that?
I actually work with the Youth Action Board in Lincoln. So I help facilitate their meetings and we host their meetings. The youth are really engaged. They really do want their voices heard. They're really excited for the potential of the YHDP grant being awarded in Lincoln. They have some great input and thoughts on what the city of Lincoln needs. So I know when the Balance of State received their funding, their Youth Action Board, you know, probably is going through all the emotions that the one here in Lincoln did. And they're the ones that really kind of drove what programs were going to be offered within the Balance of State. And I hear they're a very active board. They do meet frequently. I don't know, you know, how frequent right now with COVID, but they seem to be a very active board. They've participated in some panels as well. Kudos to them. I think they've done a great job and look forward to the city of Lincoln getting it. So our Youth Action Board can do the same thing.
Yeah, well, you definitely have the right people at the table to apply for those grants. So I'll be looking forward to that. Well, let's see. Do any of the support resources include any artistic mentorship or creative space?
I'm kind of on the hunt for this in other communities, but here we have in Lincoln, we have, oh gosh, I'm blanking on it. We have the skate park, but is it, oh, help me out.
Okay.
The Bay?
Bay, thank you, goodness gracious. Yes, we have the skate park. And I've had several youth go through there. They're if you're not familiar with them, and you that's something I think every community needs. The idea behind it is there's a skate park, but then on the other side of it, there's a coffee house that can be rented out, and they have a stage where people can perform. They can do spoken word, they can do concerts, they can do one acts, they can, yeah, all kinds of stuff. And they use the coffee shop there to hire at-risk youth so that they can work there, make the coffee. Now they have, all of a sudden they have a resume. I know Mike Smith also in his business plan was, the goal is to have like art resources there. Thank you, Susan, for putting that plug in there. But they want to, you know, encourage youth to do things like graphic design, and they want to give them a space. You know, schools don't always necessarily have programs to meet artistic kind of outlets and jobs, you know, around artistic abilities and things like that. And so he does a really great job of mentoring. And there's, yeah, all kinds of resources there. I think I'd love to see that in other communities where, you know, if we have a youth who's coming out of high school, maybe doesn't have the best grades, but has like an amazing artistic talent, like where do we foster that? How do we turn that into a career? There's plenty of, you know, web design kind of careers that just kids may not even know about, or, you know, it's not even in their, you know, in their thought process of going to school for something like this. So I think I don't know, I always use them and just kind of say, hey, what do you got for this particular thing? And kind of go from there.
Yeah, definitely. There's a level of tech savviness, you know, and I mean, just watch YouTube channels and how much artistic ability there is, graphic design. And so I'm glad you brought up the web design. You can do a movie on your phone. And
they do, these kids do. It's
yeah.
like I've seen some pretty talented artistic stuff coming out of these youth. And I'm like, oh my gosh, if we could harness that into a career, you'd be on fire.
Yeah, very good. Well, let me look here. Have you considered talking with Innovation Campus for additional resources or maybe recreating the Artists on the Edge program?
Yep, we have a couple. Again, it's kind of a Lincoln thing. I don't know if anybody knows of like other things outside of here, and if anybody, I would say like if anybody wants to shoot me ideas, like grab my email and shoot them over to me. I'd love to expand what I'm doing. But yes, we have the Yes Studio here in Lincoln, and I have thought about reaching out to Innovation Campus and doing some things there. So yeah, it's all on my radar. I feel like I'm kind of like doing this blind. So if anybody has resources they want to shoot my way, like I'm glad to do the legwork.
Very good. We did feature Innovation Campus on one of our webinars last year, so that's on our YouTube channel. They've got some great resources there. Well, I think we've gotten through all the questions. Yep, and I'm looking in the chat. So,
John, I just wanted to mention, for those of you that are in the Sarpy area, we did post some information from Monica about liftupsarpycounty.org. So if any of you are in that area and would like more information, you can certainly grab that out of the chat as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Susan. Okay, well, let me do my, sorry, I got to find my little outro here. Okay, so that completes all the questions from today's presentation. I would like to thank everyone for attending, and a special thank you to our presenters. Also want to thanks again to our sponsor, Klein Williams. So this webinar has been approved for 1.5 hours of continuing legal education and 1.5 hours of mental health continuing education. If you neglected to enter your license number, you can contact us after the webinar at outreach@nifa.org. And as I mentioned before, this webinar and previous webinars are recorded and available on our website, nifa.org, under community development, and then trainings and webinars, or go to our YouTube channel, which is NIFA Housing. And I would also invite you to follow NIFA on Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter, because we're constantly posting information that's valuable to Nebraskans, including the statewide, it's live across the entire state, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, with links to all of those entities. So stay tuned for next week's webinar, which is focused on single-family rehab. How are nonprofits and developers using single-family rehab to maintain the housing stock and boost affordable housing? So that concludes our webinar for the day. Thank you very much to all of you. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.